Okay, I think we're ready to get going. We have allowed as many people to escape as needed. I think if we worked at it, we could get a little bit more spread out here. We have a few tables over here without anybody, if somebody would like to come over there. We can't have more than one or two people per table. That's the rule in here. So as I look around the room, it looks like most everybody has been here already. So we will do a little bit of review. We are here, we're studying Compassionaries. This is the book. Unleash the Power of Serving, a book I wrote about 3 years ago, and using that as the basis for talking about, oh, God bless you, Ed, I am so moved. You bringing Ned with you. Look at that, coming up to the front pew. My goodness. I knew you were a man of courage. Okay. We're using this as a basis to do a really deep dive into serving others. So what we have done each of these sessions is do just a really quick review. A week is a long time to remember stuff. Depends on what it is. But so I'm just going to kind of hit the high points here from before. So far, we have learned that power is the ability to make things happen. We have talked about power and tried to expand our understanding of what power is in hopes that each one of us will see the fact that we are powerful people. Perhaps not, probably not in the way that the world says it, but nevertheless, we're powerful in that we can make things happen, both good and bad. We've talked about power being effective, even if it is quiet. One line that I have repeated, probably will the rest of the time, just because I think it says it really well. Never assume that loud is strong and quiet is weak. We've talked about quiet power, and a lot of times serving others is powerful, but it's in a quiet way. But it does make things happen, and we never know how far that will go. We've spent one whole session talking about what Jesus said about serving others, some of what he said, not everything. I like to refer to some of what we looked at as bookend statements by Jesus about his ministry. One coming in the very early part when he went to the synagogue in Nazareth. This is reported in Luke 4. We looked at that. He read from Isaiah and essentially said, this is what I came to do, to serve people in need. And then at the end of his ministry, literally right before he was arrested in the garden and eventually went through the mock trial and appeared before Pontius Pilate and eventually crucified, the statement of the importance of serving in washing the disciples' feet. So at the beginning and at the end, in my way of seeing it, is that emphasizes how important what he said, what he communicated. And then we looked at that one passage in Matthew 20 about where when James and John's mother came and said, how about helping my boys get a special spot here? You know, one on your right hand, one on your left. And that's when Jesus said, but the Son of Man came to serve, not to be served. And so that's what we looked at on that. And therefore, that's why we said Jesus raised serving to the highest calling. And then last week, we looked at the fact that we are hardwired to serve biologically, emotionally, and socially. In other words, God has created us in such a way that he has given us incentives to serve. Makes us feel good, gives us a sense of purpose. Come back to that in just a moment. and strengthens our relationships with the people with whom we serve, as well as those we serve. Just today, I was with the executive director of the organization I volunteer with in Lenoir City, the Good Samaritan Center in Lenoir City, and we were visiting board members. I've just become the president of the board there, and I don't know many of those people, so, and she's new, the executive director is, so we're just visiting different board members, just getting acquainted. And this was a banker, a young lady, young to me. Turns out she's got a grown daughter. I wouldn't have guessed that. But anyway, and she was talking about getting the bank employees out in the community and serving. And that always interests me when I hear that. Well, why do you do that? Do you find that makes a difference? So, yes. They want to give back to the community. They want to do something to make a difference besides just collecting a paycheck. And I said, so what you're telling me is it gives them more of a sense of purpose. And she said, oh, absolutely. So, bing, there you go. Just a little thing in my head goes off when I hear that kind of stuff. So that's just a thumbnail sketch of what we've talked about so far. In each one of these sessions, we have looked at some of what the Bible says, different passages, some more Old Testament passages, and then we'll move on to the New next week. So Isaiah says, feed the hungry and help those in trouble. Then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you will be as bright as noon. Feed the hungry and help those in trouble. The same Isaiah who wrote the passage that Jesus read in the synagogue in Nazareth. And then Zechariah, this is what the Lord Almighty says, administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the alien or the poor. In your hearts, do not think evil of each other. That last sentence will really sort of speaks to something we're going to talk about a little bit later on in this session. In your hearts, do not think evil of each other. Not sure about you, but I think that's a line that needs to be heard by a lot of people in the U.S. these days. All different kinds of people. And then finally, this is one everybody knows, or at least some of it, is Micah 6:8. He has showed you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That pretty well summarizes. So these are just more passages that underscore how important it is for us to be about serving people, particularly people in need. So now we will look at part 2 of the benefits of serving others. So last week was part 1, and that had to do with the benefits that we derive from it. I've already alluded to it as we reviewed here just a minute ago. We are made to feel good, we have a stronger sense of purpose, and our relationships are strengthened. Those are the benefits that come to us when we do it. Now we're going to talk about what I think is even more important, and that is the benefits that the people who are on the receiving end of our serving get. That's something we really need to think about. Without doing a lot of thinking, we probably have some awareness of that, but my guess is we don't often stop and think about it. We should, but we don't. So this is part 2. There are 2 things that we're going to talk about. One is serving people in need gives them hope, and the second thing is serving people in need builds community. So let's look at the first part. Serving people in need gives them hope. If you've been reading in the book, then you know there's pretty much a whole chapter there about that, and I will use some of that material and then add some other stuff too. Have you ever seen this line or heard it said, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional? Anybody ever seen or heard that before? Nobody? Okay, George, you've heard that. Okay, seen it. Did you say it? Are you the originator of it? Oh, okay. No. When I first read that some time ago, it was one of those, what does that mean? Because we use pain and suffering interchangeably a lot of times. And that's reasonable to do that, but in fact, there are some differences. And so, what this line says is there is not one of us in this world who can avoid pain at some point in our lives. Most of us at many points. It may be physical pain, it may be emotional pain, it may be, who knows, but we're going to experience pain. Now we know, in some cases, pain is a good thing. When you burn your hand on a hot stove, that's a good thing, in that, you should never touch the stove again when it's on. So there are some good aspects of that, but most of the time pain is a negative. We want to avoid pain, if at all possible. So what does it mean by suffering being optional? Well, pain is involved in suffering. The difference is this, as I see it. Pain is something that happens as a result of, as a consequence of something that happens to us. We may be involved in causing that to happen. It may in some way be self-induced. Suffering is a continuation, often an unnecessary continuation of that experience of pain. So they're very closely related, but a little bit different. And here's the reason for saying that. Hope is the difference. When we experience pain, let's say that someone very close to us passes away. We've all had that experience. We feel the grief, which is painful. And it can be painful for a long time. And here's a fact. The more deeply we love, the more we're going to feel grief. I often tell people, I did when I was a pastor, they just can't understand why they can't get over the grief. I said, well, that's just a sign of how much you loved. And that's true. I believe that. I mean, if you don't love somebody, you don't feel any grief. It doesn't matter as much if they're gone. Hopelessness, however, goes far beyond that. So I've given a kind of a definition of hopelessness is the inability to imagine a time when help will come, when life will return to normal, when pain will end. So a person who finds himself in a hopeless situation is in such a deep hole, he really can't see the light at the top much. It's just it's a dark place, and there doesn't seem to be any way out at all. I would say that probably the vast, vast, vast majority of the Jews in the concentration camps under Nazi Germany found themselves to be in a hopeless situation. However, I just read an article about Viktor Frankl, who was one of those, who learned that if you have something to live for, if you can remember something to live for, even in the most horrific circumstances imaginable. My way of thinking, that's what those concentration camps were. They were about as bad as anything a human being could experience. But if you had something to live for, usually it was somebody in their family. I've got to live to see my spouse again, or my parents, or my children, whatever. Somehow they were able to survive. This article said that Frankl noted that he could almost predict when somebody was going to die in the concentration camp, because he could see this progression that repeated itself over and over again. And I can't remember everything he said there. Wish I could. We'd stop eating. There were just several things that when he saw them doing certain things, he knew it was only a matter of time and not very much. And sure enough, they would die. But he said there were others, not very many, unfortunately, that seemed to avoid that. And it was because they had some hope. That's how powerful hope is. I've included in the book this quote because it says it so well. Take from a man his wealth and you hinder him. Take from him his purpose and you slow him down. But take from man his hope and you stop him. He can go on without wealth, even without purpose for a while, but he will not go on without hope. Until I wrote that part of the book, I don't think I preached about hope, but I don't think I had ever really understood the power of hope. So let me just stop for a minute. Do any of you know of a situation, your family or friend, neighbor, whatever, that where you could see the difference that hope made for them in difficult circumstances? Anybody know of anything like that you wouldn't mind sharing? John's coming with a microphone so the folks on streaming can get that. I don't want to be the only source of stories here. Okay, George. Wait, the microphone's coming. There you go.
I just thought about this thing on, I guess. Situation, we were talking about the other day, if you were out driving a car in a country road and it breaks down on you, and you start looking for a place to go to get some help, and here it is after 10 o'clock. What are you going to do? And there's 2 or 3 houses up on the road that you're going to go to that you're broken down on. Now, we always talk about, well, I'm a safe person, so I shouldn't be any problem with whatever door I knock on. But what's your thinking about how to behave if I am not this good person that I happen to be? That I'm really using this as a subterfuge to break into this person's house by being very clandestine about it. So how do you defend yourself against this person who's going to pull a gun on you as soon as you open the door and threaten your life unless you do whatever this person wants you to do? None of which is pleasant for anybody.
So you're asking, George, about whether or not to help in a situation like that. You're asking from the point of view of the person inside the house.
Right.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try to give you an answer to that. But I will say that we're going to have a session later on about helping in difficult circumstances and that kind of thing. So there's more coming on fine. That.
That's fine.
Of course, there's a lot of possible variables in a situation like that. If I'm the person inside the house, if my family is with me, wife and possibly children, I'm going to be more cautious than I would be just for myself, for reasons that would be fairly obvious, I think, to anyone. If this were to happen today, having a cell phone makes a big difference. So we can actually call and verify this person is who he says he is before we let them in the house. We could, we could say, for example, we're strangers. I don't know you. I need to verify. And can you give me a name and number of somebody that I can call to verify who you are, or something of that nature? Verification for a stranger becomes a critical piece of what you do and don't do. And that's easier today than it used to be because of this little device that we carry around with us everywhere. Well, if he's got a gun, that's a whole different thing.
That's the one I'm working with.
Okay, well, you might be better just to let him have whatever money you got and so forth. I mean, how much money is it worth you getting shot? That's right. So just give him, yeah. Don't hurt me. Don't hurt my family, especially. Here, you can have, yeah. That's just common sense, I think.
I was just looking for a different story. I was just looking for a different answer, than maybe I hadn't been able to think of.
Okay.
So far, you've hit on what I've thought of.
Sure. Okay. Well, as I said, we'll hit on that a little bit more in a future session about to be a good Samaritan or not, to be or not to be, to use Shakespeare's phrase. So let me ask the question: anybody have a story about somebody who's was able to survive very difficult circumstances because of the hope they had? Yeah, Gary, you coming with the mic. John's quick on his feet.
When I talk about hope, I'm talking about hope as a Christian. It's a different hope. It's certain hope because it's about Jesus. And I was on my deathbed 15 years ago, and my wife prayed me through it. I got closer to Jesus than I ever imagined possible. And he was on the other side of the bed rail when I came through. But it's a whole different hope when Jesus is involved.
Yeah. And the basis of that hope, ultimately, Gary, is the resurrection.
Absolutely.
So if you could hear what Gary was saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When he had a critical medical issue years ago and ended up having to have a heart transplant, I believe. And the hope that he had in Jesus. And for all of us in this room, that's a source of hope that makes us different from the average person on the street. Let me tell you about what for me is a powerful illustration of the power of hope is in doing the research for the book, this part of the book, I ran across an article about a psychologist by the name of Dale Archer who spent time in New Orleans after hurricanes Katrina and Rita. Remember, those came about, one right on, the Rita came right after Katrina. And so there were thousands of people in New Orleans who survived. Some were not so fortunate. Some came to Knoxville and stayed right here in this room. First Baptist was a shelter for some of the Katrina people who had to be relocated for a part of a time. But of course, some went back, some stayed. And Archer said that he found that there were two groups of people. There were surviving victims, and there were survivors who made it through that experience and kind of got their lives back together. The second group eventually got back on their feet and got in their home or a home and continued living and all that. The first group just never could get things back together again. And he said the difference was not how much they lost or who they lost or how many people they lost, because a lot of people there did lose a lot of friends and family. It was hope. He could easily distinguish one group from the other by that one characteristic right there, hope. So when you have hope, you can make it through. And that's what the person who gave the saying that's on the screen right now is saying. So hope is powerful. Now, here's why that's important, because serving gives hope. First of all, it recognizes the need. Again, later in a later session, we're going to talk about the absolute necessity of recognizing a need. and it responds in a caring way. It's one thing to recognize the need, it's something else to respond in a caring way. You see the difference? It's one thing to say, I see somebody on the street corner here, looks like they're maybe homeless. I can tell by looking at them. They've got every earthly possession they have with them or whatever, and recognize there's a need there. It's something else to do something to try to meet that need. But serving them gives them hope. So with hope, people have the ability, the desire, the energy to help themselves. And that's what we want people to have, is the desire to do what they can to help themselves. It's the hopeless person, the person who cannot see from the bottom of that pit, cannot see out, can't see the light, that is stuck. So, true story. In the early years of Operation Inasmuch in Fayetteville, North Carolina, that's where it got started, the endeavor had grown to the point that we involved a good number of different churches from the community all serving at the same time, and we concentrated home repair projects in one neighborhood. We felt like it would make a bigger impact, and sure enough it did. So a friend of mine who was responsible for setting up the home repair projects went into the Sapona Road area of Fayetteville, a bad place to go, even in the daytime, and certainly not at night. Drugs, crime, prostitution, you name it, it was there. And she was warned by friends, you have no business being in that neighborhood. But Sue Bird was the kind of person that would not be put off. So she went anyway, knocked on doors. I see that you need a new roof. Could we come and give you a new roof? I see that your porch is rotting out here, and you maybe need a paint. So she went to a lot of the homes in this one area, asking if work could be done. Now, some of the people there, believe it or not, said, no thank you. You're offering to help for free, but I don't believe it. And the reason was the county and the city had made lots of promises to the people in that community and broken every one of them. So they didn't want to be taken in. They said no. But enough people said yes that there were about 24 different home repair projects that took place in that neighborhood. Well, the people kind of forgot about it for a while, I think. But then when the materials were delivered, like on about Thursday, Friday of that week, and you had shingles and lumber and whatever was going to be needed, they thought, well, maybe this is really going to happen. And then the Saturday came when they had all of these projects happening in that neighborhood, and you had the Baptists working on this house, and 2 doors down, you had the Presbyterians working on this house, and across the street, you had the Catholics working on this house, and down the street, you had the Episcopal. It was just like that all over the entire neighborhood. A veritable army of Christian volunteers showed up in that neighborhood. None of them had ever been there before, ever. But that day they did. And they did all that work, and then they went home. The next week, 1 week later, some people from the local community college came in to teach the people who lived there how to read and write, because illiteracy was at a high rate, which wouldn't surprise anyone. 4 times as many people showed up that day to learn how to read and write as had ever come before. The community college people said it's because the church people were here the week before. And what happened was, when this big group of people came in and did what was needed by some of the people there, they gave them hope. Somebody cares. That's where the hope comes from. When somebody cares enough to give their time, use their skill, whatever needs to be done, it gives them hope. And when they have hope, they start doing for themselves. That's what happens. There's a story at the end of the chapter on hope in the book. I encourage you to read it because I probably won't tell it like it needs to be told. It's about a young man named Mark. So Mark was leaving school one day, high school, and he saw a fellow student with his arms literally loaded down with everything you could think of, and he was dropping things, and so can't remember the other boy's name right now. I'm going to call him Bill. Bill? It was Bill? Okay. Bill stopped and offered to help Mark. Excuse me. Bill was the one who had dropped some things. So he helped him gather up his stuff. He had a baseball glove, and he had a lot of books and articles of clothing and everything like that. And so he helped him, and they were going the same direction. So Mark helped Bill carry his things to his house. When they got to Bill's house, he invited him in, and they went in, and they watched television a little bit and had a Coke and just sat there and just got to know each other and have some get acquainted time. And then my light's still on. Okay, we're good? Wake up back there. Okay, so Mark left, and from then on, they sort of saw each other every now and then in high school, but not, they didn't develop a real close friendship. But on the graduation, they both graduated around the same time. Bill sought out Mark, and he said, "Do you remember that day that you stopped and helped me?" And Mark said, "Yeah, I remember." He said, "I had cleaned out my locker because I didn't want anyone else to have to fool with that mess. And I had saved up some of my mother's sleeping pills. And I was going home to take my life. But when you came along and you helped me, and you even went into the home, and I decided I didn't want to do that." So that was a young man who at that moment was hopeless until Mark came along, and without really being aware of what he was doing, he was just responding to a very, very simple need. Serving another person gives them hope. Serving the people you do on Tuesday evenings gives them some hope. They need a lot more, but you give them some hope. And anyone that you serve anytime, you give them hope. We don't think about that. I'm not suggesting we need to pat ourselves on the back. That's not it at all. We just need to be aware that if we will let the Lord use our hands and our feet and our mouth to convey some love and compassion to people who are in need, we give them hope. But that's not all that serving does. So let's continue. Serving also builds community. So what is community? Most of the time I think we use that word to refer to maybe, it can be a whole city, it could be just a neighborhood. But community is my definition of it, is a general sense of belonging and togetherness. It's a sense of being known and supported by those living in some proximity to us. So it could be the people on our street, it could be the people in our town, it could be, to a lesser extent, the people in our state. Farther out it gets, the more diluted that sense of community becomes. But here's the problem. We live in a time when the sense of community is not what it used to be. I'm going to venture out here. Honestly, do you agree or disagree with that? You agree? Okay. It doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on, and I'm not going to get involved in that. Lord have mercy. That's for Brent McDougal to do in his session. But we have lost it for a lot of reasons, and we're aware of it. We don't really know what to do about it in a lot of cases. Here's part of the problem. I ran across this phrase, otherizing. I had never seen or heard that term before. It's defined as the devastating ability we have to view different human beings as other or as nothings who are not worthy of human compassion or care. That's not a new thing. If you go back a couple of hundred years to the times of slavery, it was very prevalent then too. And it is in all over the world, unfortunately. But we in the Bible have a phrase. There are a number of biblical passages. This is one that is best known. We are called to one another, each other. This is a good antidote for the otherizing. Serve one another in love. The entire law is summed up in a single command. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. And what was it that Zechariah said about thinking evil, speaking evil of others? We noted at the beginning of our time. So serving others builds community. I really believe if there were a way, if there could possibly be a way, we could get, I'm just going to say 75%. I know that's an outlandish percentage of people in our community to be involved in serving others on a regular basis. We would see a lot of the otherizing go away. Because suddenly you're thinking about people as worthy of your compassion and care, worthy of your service, instead of the opposite. I've even thought, I know this is crazy, totally crazy, worse than crazy. I don't even have a word bad enough or extreme enough for it. If we could get the Democrats and the Republicans, see what I mean? When we serve people, you know this from your experience downstairs. You may not see some of the people for several weeks at a time, but you know them and they know you, and you build somewhat of a relationship.
Oh, yeah. When they're not there, we worry about them.
Yeah.
We haven't seen you in weeks. Are you okay? Where
Yeah.
have you been?
Yeah. If we could all develop that mindset, it would make a world of difference in our world. It really does build community. One of the things that we talk about when we're training a church to do Operation Inasmuch is the potential that an Inasmuch event can have in transforming a community. And I know when I say that, people think, well, now come on, David, that's preacher talk. You're exaggerating here. Far be it from me to do that. I mean, I would never do that. But it really can, and I think I can help you understand that or see that with a couple of stories that will illustrate what I'm saying. Several years ago, the Department of Justice saw the need to do something to change the way some people in some of the cities of our country perceive law enforcement people. And so they kind of put some ideas together, and they contacted the Metro Nashville Police Department and asked, would you be willing to pilot this program? And so the police department said, yeah, we'll try that. And so they handpicked a young officer by the name of Jason. And they said, now you pick out a few officers you want to work in this with you, and we're going to assign you to one of the most crime-ridden areas in our city. The people who live there call it the jungle. That says a whole lot right there. Crime rate through the roof, drugs, all kinds of stuff. And somewhere in downtown Nashville. And they kind of gave Jason a carte blanche to go in there and make the difference. Change the way the people there thought about law enforcement, because you can imagine how they thought about them. About the only time they ever saw them was when there was a problem. So Jason got his team together and he said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to serve these people. Yeah, we'll do some police work, but we're going to serve these people. And so they got to know the people. Instead of just riding around in their cars, they got out of their cars and they started talking to the people who lived there. And in the course of doing that, they discovered a man who lived in an apartment there who did not have a bed. So they put their money together, bought a bed, and took it to him, gave it to him. So now he has a bed to sleep in. They also found a single mom who had a job, probably wasn't a real good paying job, but it was a job, but she had transportation issues. So, once again, they pooled their money together, which wasn't nearly enough, went to the Fraternal Order of Police there in Nashville and said, we need some money to buy a used car so this lady can get to work. And that's what they did. They gave her a car. They discovered that that's a food desert. And so they partnered with some churches in the Nashville area to begin to bring in additional food, to give away, a food pantry type arrangement right there in the neighborhood where it was needed. They learned that the residents said that one of the things they didn't have in that community was a place to congregate. If a family was having a little gathering of some kind, their apartments were too small, and they didn't have a place to do that. And if they wanted to have a picnic or something on a Saturday afternoon, they didn't have a place. So the policeman said, we'll fix that. They got the money for the materials and built a gazebo in a prominent place in that neighborhood. Well, the people there saw how much they cared. And they began to think about the police as different, in a very different way than they did previously. And Jason told me when I talked to him in writing this part of the story in the book, he said, we knew that we had reached our objective when on a Saturday night there was a drug deal gone bad and there was a shooting. And when other police officers came in to investigate, none of the residents there would even talk to them. But when Jason and his crew came in, they told them who did the shooting, where the drugs were, and anything else they wanted to know. Why? Because Jason and his group showed how much they cared about the people who lived there. In my mind, that shows that serving others can transform a community. I just watched a video of people in that neighborhood talking about how they used to feel about the police and how they do now as a result of what happened. Second story, or maybe I would say page 2, Paul Harvey style. Zebulon, North Carolina is just on the north side of Raleigh, just kind of a bedroom community of Raleigh. A friend of mine has been pastor of Zebulon Baptist Church for decades, and he told me this story. Years ago, probably 20, 25 years ago, their church did Operation Inasmuch for the first time, and it went so well that they decided to do it a second time the next year, and they intentionally decided that they would involve another congregation to come with them, And since Zebulon Baptist is a predominantly white church, they asked the predominantly black church in town to come in with them. And so that's what they did. They all worked together. They had black and white folks working on pretty much all the different projects all day long during their Inasmuch event. The next day, on Sunday evening, the two congregations came together in the sanctuary of Zebulon Baptist, and they just took that time to tell about their experience. You know, what they did on their project, who they helped, what kind of help they gave. They just kind of had a free-flowing conversation, if you will, about what they had done. In that sharing time, toward the last of the time, a lady from the black church stood up and she said, "You white folks may not have noticed that my skin color is a little bit different from that of my brothers and sisters." And she went on and told how a female ancestor of 2 or 3 generations earlier had been raped by a white man in that community. And a pregnancy resulted, and she was a descendant of that pregnancy. And then she said, "It has taken me putting on my work gloves and my blue jeans and getting down on my hands and knees with you white folks to begin to let go of some of the bitterness that I have felt for years." That's pretty remarkable, but it's not the end of the story. So what happened a short time later was a man in my friend's church died, white man. And somehow or another, his family knew that their male ancestor was responsible for the rape that woman referenced. And so when they had his funeral, they invited that woman and her entire family to sit with the family at the funeral because they were family. I think that's community transformation. Something like that doesn't happen, but that the word doesn't get out. Why did it happen? Because they served together. And when they were serving together, they weren't thinking about how can we transform this community, probably. But that's what God does. He takes what we do that He is calling us to do, and He does way more with it than we ever dreamed could be possible. So yes, communities can be transformed. Serving has that kind of power. So I hope you're beginning to understand why I insist on calling serving as a powerful thing. Quiet, loud, somewhere in between, doesn't matter to me. It has the power to make things happen in a good way. And that's what God wants to have happen. That's all I got to say tonight. Any of you have a comment or question about anything? I've done way more talking than I really intended to do. Well, before George leaves, let's have a prayer. He's going to be going to choir rehearsal, right, George? I'll stand up for you. Father, we do thank you for calling us to serve, and what we need from you is a softening of our spirit to recognize needs when we see them, and then to respond in compassion as we can. Help us to learn how to do that well, and help us always to remember that we serve and we love others because you have first loved us. May we always strive to be your hands and feet. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you all. Thank you all for being very faithful and consistent.